introducing our speaker today, Jessie Rhodes. She graciously agreed to speak with me Friday evening after just arriving home from her RCC office because she had gotten the call from Carlos that he was unable to come today, and she was the lucky person that was going to get to come speak to us. And during our call, she shared a bit of herself with me. Originally from Houston, Jessie has lived in several places with her family, including spending her junior high years in the Dominican Republic, where she spent quite a bit of time volunteering with her mom. And this experience inspired her to pursue a career in service to others. Family ties eventually drew her back to Stillwater, Oklahoma, where she completed her BA in psychology with an emphasis on early childhood development at Oklahoma State University. Yes, that OSU, right? She began her career in Stillwater at the Family Service Center, co-facilitating the BIT, or Batterers Intervention Prevention Program. In this court-mandated program, Jessie worked directly with perpetrators of abuse to facilitate each participant's goal of stopping their abusive tendencies. For much of the past 3 years, Jessie has been part of the Galveston Resource and Crisis Center, which we all refer to as RCC, in the case management of survivors of abuse and their children. While serving at the RCC, Jessie found her passion in speaking to the public about the impacts of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and child abuse. She became the RCC's Community Outreach Specialist and Prevention Education Coordinator. In this role, she speaks to professionals and community members covering a variety of topics with the hope of raising awareness and protective factors for all. Please join me in welcoming Jessie Rhodes.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, so my name is Jessica Rhodes, or please call me Jessie. My mom calls me Jessica when I'm in trouble, so I don't go by that. So like Rachel mentioned, I have been working with the Resource and Crisis Center for the past 3 years. When I first started there, I started as a case manager, working directly with clients and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. But now I just came into this new position in September, so I've been the community outreach specialist. So my job is to go out into the community, make partnerships with other nonprofit organizations, and just meet lovely community members like you guys. So I really appreciate you guys taking your time to listen to me speak about the services that we offer. So I'll start with that before I go into my favorite part, which is prevention. So at the Resource and Crisis Center, we do a lot to help the community. So we are a 53-bed shelter. We are also the only sexual assault and domestic violence service center within Galveston County. So if anybody is seeking services, we are the only one that is dual certified. So we get our certification from TCFV, which is the Texas Council on Family Violence, as well as TASA, which is the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. So we are the only one that's dual certified in Galveston County. With the TASA certification, that actually allows us to offer medical accompaniments for sexual assault survivors. So we have partnerships with UTMB as well as Clear Lake Methodist. So whenever they get a call about a sexual assault, they call us, and within an hour, we have to be at the hospital offering our services to victims. This includes the continuum of care. So whenever the sexual assault occurs, there's a sexual assault nurse examiner, there's the police officers, there's the district attorneys, and the victim advocates who are all part of this process. The victim advocate main position is to go and let the victim know their rights, as well as be that voice for the victim when they are dealing with trauma. Because obviously right after a sexual assault, it would be very difficult to consistently retell that story. So our job as a victim advocate is to make sure that they're not having to be re-traumatized multiple times by retelling the story when there's no need. So RCC actually hosts what we call DART and SART meetings. So it's domestic violence response team and then the sexual assault response team. So we actually host all of the DAs, the law enforcement officers, the SANE nurses at our agency, and we meet once a week, every Wednesday. That way we can go over all of the sexual assault and domestic violence cases within Galveston County, and we even work with Harris County as well. So again, so that victim is not having to retell their story, we do that work ourselves at RCC. That's just one of the things we do for medical accompaniment. Like I mentioned before, we're a 53-bed shelter. Right now, I'll give you guys some statistics. Since COVID, we have seen a 30% increase in domestic violence and sexual assault cases. That is nationwide. In the US, 1 out of every 4 women is sexually assaulted. In Texas, it's 1 out of every 3, so we're even worse. With that 30%, unfortunately, we've been seeing sexual assault and domestic violence shelters throughout the state of Texas fill pretty quickly. That's probably one thing that you guys will hear from multiple community members who have had to stay at RCC or have recommended somebody to stay at RCC, is that we don't have space. We're seeing that, unfortunately, throughout the state of Texas. But I was mentioning to Ms. Rachel earlier that shelter availability does change on a daily basis. And if we don't have the space available, we stay on the line with our victims and get them to a place that does have space available. One thing that we see a lot is that Harris County victims will come to us because they'll want to leave that Houston environment and vice versa. So we work really closely with Houston Area Women's Center or HAWK, Bay Area Turning Point, Bridge Over Troubled Waters. For Resource and Crisis Center, we actually are part of this website where every single morning all of the shelters in Texas will go and put their bed space availability on this one website, so it's available for all of the advocates and the case managers to see. So if the victim doesn't know where to go, more than likely we do. So we ask them to stay on the line with us so we can help them get the extra resources. We also do legal and therapy advocacy. So we don't do therapy or legal advocacy anymore at the Resource and Crisis Center, but we work with a lot of agencies that do. So Gulf Coast Center, we work with, I'm blanking, you guys. It's been a while since I've been a case manager. Yes, we use Lone Star quite often. We've even worked with GIRP, which is the Immigration Services, because we do have a lot of victims who unfortunately have external issues, not just DV or SA, but we can also help them with that. We've seen everything, housing, financial abuse, domestic abuse, everything. So in my 7 years of being in this service, I've seen a lot, unfortunately, but there's always a little bit of hope at the end of the tunnel. I think I talked with Rachel about that as well on the phone on Friday. It's just consistently looking for a little bit of light and a little bit of service. I love you guys' model because it's at RCC, it's the same. You know, our mission is to help women, men, children, it does not matter. We are an open agency. I'll go into that a little bit. So we used to be known as the Women's Crisis Center, but we actually changed it to the Resource and Crisis Center because we also accept men and members of the LGBTQ community. So we have our women's shelter here on Galveston Island, but we also take in people who are fleeing that don't necessarily fit that women criteria, you know. A lot of people don't know that. I think that right now women's crisis centers try to state that because predominantly the victims are women, but we know that that's not the case anymore. So going into my favorite part, prevention. So my job is to go out in the community and speak about the Resource and Crisis Center, the statistics, but another thing that we've been trying to do, because the CDC has declared this a public health crisis, is offer prevention. Now, we haven't seen really big improvements in prevention only within the last 10 years. That's when the CDC started putting together task force for preventioners, which would be me. So in the state of Texas, we have 73 prevention programs that do wonderful work with the youth as well as adult members of the community. So just a few of the things that I've been doing with Resource and Crisis Center is that we have partnerships with multiple libraries. Now, I'll give you guys a little bit of bad news before I get in the good news. So, because Pivot's my middle name, so there's always a little bit of good news at the end. In September 1st, we actually saw new restrictions from the Office of the Attorney General. The Office of the Attorney General is how we get our funding to run these prevention programs. So when they gave us this restriction, it was absolute for almost all prevention programs within Texas, 73 of us. We are no longer allowed to teach prevention education in K through 12 public school settings. So yes, very, very bad news, you guys, because these are the youth that we're trying to reach out to. This has been due to, I would say, the pushback that some parents feel about their kids hearing about sexual assault or domestic violence in the school system. They don't want their kids hearing it from them, from a school teacher or a preventioner. I'm very saddened by this because, you know, my job as a professional, you guys heard my degree, it's in earlyhood childhood development. I've spent 7 years working with domestic violence and sexual assault perpetrators and survivors, and so we have the information. And as my mom always says, you know, just because you don't want it being taught doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. So we need to tell our kids about how they can protect themselves, because unfortunately there has been a lot of advances in human trafficking being moved to online. So there's been a lot of technological advances for perpetrators, unfortunately, and we need to know how to combat those things. So a little bit bad news, but a little bit of good news. So now that we're no longer allowed in the schools, K through 12 schools, public school setting, I'm not sure about private because they have a little bit different restrictions. But for what I've done is that we've moved towards community centers, libraries, any place that youth are still there. So I've actually made partnerships with the Rosenberg Library here on Galveston Island, as well as the Lamarck Public Library in Lamarck. I'm from Texas City, or I live in Texas City. So a couple of things I'm doing with the Rosenberg. I actually run 2 groups. One is a community advocacy group, so that is open for all members. It's once a month, and so it's a place where you can come, you can talk about gaps in the system, learn a little bit more about the statistics with DV and SA, human trafficking. I will say that human trafficking is picking up in this area because Houston is a part of the trafficking triangle with San Antonio and Dallas, as well as we have the cruise ports here. So we have I-45, I-10, that's the land. We have Hobby and Bush International, and then we also have the cruise ports. So we're unfortunately, a big part of human trafficking down here. And then, so place for everybody, community advocacy group, place where we can all talk about those issues and see how we can help the community. And then I'm also running an LGBTQIA group at the Rosenberg Library for youth. There is a need because that demographic is specifically vulnerable, because when it comes to financial abuse and isolation from loved ones, you see a lot of that with DV cases, unfortunately, because usually when the LGBTQ individual comes out, if the family doesn't feel like doesn't feel supportive or is not supportive, then they will rely on that significant other partner. But then that means that they're isolated in that environment. So that means they're a vulnerable demographic even more so. So that's a place for youth to come and talk about it, because most people don't know that the ages 16 to 24 are the most vulnerable in the state of Texas. We see victimization almost 10 times more likely for 16 to 24-year-olds. People who are just starting out with relationships need that guidance on what a healthy relationship looks like. So that's what I'm doing at Rosenberg. I have a little bit more leeway since they're a private library. I always find that funny. Private library is a little bit less restrictive for me right now. And then with the Lamarck Public Library, I'm taking a little bit a softer approach. So in March, I'm actually going to be running a job interview and job training class for youth. So that's another way of raising protective factors. So I'll get a little bit into that. So protective factors are your basic needs. It's food, shelter, housing. If you don't know where your next meal is going to be, if you don't know where you're going to lay your head at night, how can you think about how healthy is this relationship? And human trafficking, because I would say that's one of my specialties that I speak about. If you don't know where you're going to sleep at night and it's 20 degrees out, do you really care if you have to sleep with somebody so you have a warm bed? And we call that survivor sex, and that's not consent. That means that they're forced into that situation because of external circumstances. So we look at things like those, like the Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs, which are protective factors, and we work on those specific details in the community so we can raise protective factors so we can actually focus on the things that we need to. So I really highly encourage you guys, look at RC Services. I brought some pamphlets in my cards as well. I speak to anybody and everybody. I'm actually going to be speaking to the Department of Criminal Justice with the women's prison next week. So like I said, I speak to everybody, every demographic. So I got my cards, I've got my plant pamphlets. If you guys need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or RCC. We have a 24/7 hotline. We're always ready for a call. Okay, thank you guys.